Should you work for a big tech company or a startup? That's what I want to help you answer today by comparing the pros and cons of big tech to the pros and cons of startup as a product manager. There is no right or wrong. Comparing big tech to startups is a little bit like comparing apples to oranges. There are so many considerations and benefits to each, and it really comes down to what your personal preference is. So I wanted to make this video because I have had a chance to work in my career at 3 different large tech companies, and I've also founded 2 startups and been immersed in the startup ecosystem. So I feel like I have a pretty good grasp on the 2 worlds, and there is so much that I have learned through each of my experiences. Okay, let's start with a large tech company. For some context, if you are a product manager in a large tech company, it's very likely that you will be responsible for a very small part of the product, or even a small part of multiple products. Because in a large tech company, responsibility and ownership of products is often broken down to a very, very granular level. And that's just because operating at that size and scale, when you have hundreds and thousands and millions of customers, there's a lot of complexity, there are a lot of dependencies, and it takes a lot to actually maintain a software product at that scale. And therefore, ownership can often be broken down into a very, very granular way, so that each product team is actually responsible for a micro part of a super big product. Now, every company is going to do this differently, and as you progress through your product career, it's also likely that your ownership area will grow. So if you're only looking after, let's say, a small feature when you first start your product career, you might then move up to looking after a specific, like a product area, and then a whole product portfolio. So there is opportunity to take on more. So I want to give you an example of the YouTube app. Now, I'm really simplifying this. I do not know how YouTube structures their product teams, but the YouTube app has like 4 distinct pages. It has the home page, explore page, subscriptions, and the library. Now, at a company the size of YouTube or Google, it's very likely that there are multiple product teams and multiple product owners looking after each and every one of these pages. And that just comes with scale. When you have hundreds and millions of users, there's a lot more complexity, and it takes a lot more to maintain a product. And so responsibility for a very small part of a product will sit with one particular team, because it will just take them that much effort to keep the lights on, obviously build new features into it, and just keep that product up and running. So now that we understand that, what are some of the pros of working at a large tech company? So firstly is the learning opportunity, because you get to learn product at scale. As I just mentioned, being able to learn how products are built and maintained and launched and developed at a scale where you have hundreds and thousands or millions of users is extremely valuable, because that is very, very different to building and shipping product when you are just trying to acquire new customers. There are so many challenges that come with scaling a product. You have to think so much about the different types of users you will have. You will have to think about the engineering challenges and the technical challenges that come with scaling out your product. You're not just thinking about releasing new features. You have to think about how to make that system reliable, how to manage the influx of requests you will get from millions of different customers using it, how you will prioritize something at that scale. So learning product at scale is extremely beneficial, and you can only really get that at a really large tech company. Secondly is you will be able to learn from fellow product managers, colleagues, and product leaders. So I always say that the best way to learn product is, one, to just do it, get your hands dirty, and secondly, to learn from other people. And at a large tech company, you will be surrounded by other product managers, other product teams, and everyone has a very different style and way of working. Every team works quite differently. And so it's really useful if you have other product people to lean on. You have a product organization, product leader, a VP of product, and I think the learning opportunity to see how other product people do their work is extremely useful. And I do feel like a lot of what I've learned in product, I've been able to do by watching other people. Third is collaboration with lots of other teams and lots of other disciplines. So because at a large tech company, there will be a lot of separation of duties. You will have a product team, you will have an engineering team, you will have people who distinctly do quality assurance, you will have a security team, a design team, an architecture team. You have teams that are specialized and experts in their particular discipline. And that means that you are constantly working with people that know their stuff really, really well. That means you're learning from the best. You're learning from designers who are really good at what they do. You're basically always working with people who are specialists in their particular field. And again, that is just a massive learning opportunity. Four is brand recognition. This kind of speaks for itself, but if you can get your foot in the door at a large tech company, then that can be a really good credential and experience to have on your resume. Startups will often try to hire people who have worked at established and well-known tech companies too. So brand recognition can be really important. Tech companies are also quite transparent with how they run engineering and how they run their product organization. So for example, you'll find a bunch of engineering blogs on Medium, and like Spotify, for example, is well known for how it organizes its product teams, which I believe they refer to as squads. So if you have a company that is well recognized and they're also quite transparent about how they build product and how they approach development, and it kind of makes your job easier because you can quite easily explain the type of environment that you've worked in. 5 is that the product and the market landscape in a large tech company is well understood, which basically means that it's stable and far less risky. If you have hundreds and thousands of customers, chances are that you have proven product market fit. So this can be a benefit if you are looking for something that is a bit more stable. Technology and new products don't always have to come with a lot of risk, because we are seeing that a lot of tech companies now have gone through that growth stage and have morphed into these massive enterprises that are likely going to always have a very large and strong and growing user base. Number 6. So tech companies are renowned for great compensation packages, great salaries, but also great benefits and perks. And I think it really depends, where you are at in your life or where you are at in your career, where perks and benefits and compensation could be really important for you. And that is a totally acceptable reason to want to work at a large tech company. So I can give you an example from my life where I spent 2 years on my own startup, and I obviously put a lot of my own money into that. And after 2 years, I felt like I just needed to take a step back. I was very burnt out, and I wanted to recoup some of my financial losses. And that's when I decided to intentionally go for a job at a large tech company, because to be honest, I just wanted stability. I just wanted to go somewhere where things had been established. I did not feel like working in a startup where I was gonna have to figure everything out myself and also feel financial uncertainty. So what are the cons of working at a large tech company? With that size and scale, the first con is there's a lot of process. There's approvals, gateways, a lot of dependencies and complexities. This is just the nature of having a company with thousands of employees, with multiple teams, and with complex products with millions of users. That means that things can take longer to do. Oftentimes in a large tech company, you'll find that you're not maybe shipping product or releasing product as fast or as much as you want, because it's not just a matter of building something and getting it out. You need to make sure that roadmaps are aligned, that dependencies between different teams are aligned. When you design a new solution for your product, that probably needs to go through architecture and get an approval. Basically, it's just a lot slower. There are a lot more hurdles to climb through, but that is obviously for the protection and the reliability of building at such scale. In terms of product, that means you have to create slightly longer term product roadmaps. It means that you need to have some kind of plan in place at any given time for how your team is going to spend the next 6 to 9 to 12 months. You can't be as flexible with what you build, even though you do try to be agile in that larger scale environment. So that's kind of like 3 points in one. It's process, it is things take longer, you kind of ship less because you're doing more processes. The next point is that because you are basically a small fish in a big pond, you're going to have less of an impact. Hopefully, as you grow throughout the company and your ownership area grows, you will be able to make more of an impact. Ultimately, you could be one of a few hundred product managers, one of many product teams, and your impact will not be as felt through the company. So I think the important thing there is actually to measure what impact you are making, measure the success of your product, the usage of your product. The next point is autonomy. So you won't have as much autonomy in a large tech company. There's obviously a strategy that is set by the company's leaders. There will be a roadmap planning where you will have to get alignment from a lot of different teams. In the companies I've worked at, there is a fair amount of autonomy. However, it's not always just up to you what you want to do. I think it is up to you to try and drive your product as much as you want, but you know, if the company wants to do something or go in a certain direction, then that is what you will have to do. I do think this comes down to company culture. I've been fortunate to work in companies where autonomy has been pretty good, but of course not as much autonomy as you would have in a startup. And lastly is that growth can be slower or harder. So like with any big company, there will be processes for your development and for promotion cycles. That means that even if you do a fantastic job on something, if you're acing your job, sometimes that is not always reflected in the benefits or the recognition that you get. You might also be competing with other people for promotions. Budgets can be tight, budgets can be limited. And so there's always that friction that you will face to grow within a company. So it's not that it's impossible, but you know, having said that, larger tech companies can also offer a lot of growth opportunities. It's just that that growth could be a lot slower because again, things at this size and scale generally just move a bit slower. So that's the pros and cons of big tech. If I had to summarize that, I think it really comes down to being an incredible place to learn how to build product at scale, but also learn from other people. But unfortunately, you have to counteract that with things just being slow, because there are so many people involved in all the different processes that you will have to go through. Now let's talk about startups. So the context I will give here is that every startup is going to be so different. It's going to depend on how big that startup is, what stage they are at, how much money they have in the bank, the culture and the environment that has been created by the founding team and all that kind of stuff. The pros in working as a product manager in a startup. Number one, you can have a big impact because you're likely to have a smaller team. You are likely to have less people who can take on responsibility. And so that means that you could have a great impact, a great big ownership area, and potentially own an entire product, which is great because you can really see through end to end everything around that product. If the product is early stage, that also means you can have a really big part in contributing to the vision of that product and how it comes to life. Secondly is opportunity for a very high learning curve. So in a startup, because of the small team size, you're likely to be doing a lot. You're going to be very hands-on and you're going to be figuring stuff out, which is a great way to learn. You are going to be thrown potentially into the deep end where you don't know how to do something. And yeah, you'll literally be probably making it up on the fly, but there is no better way to learn than just have to tackle the task. Beyond product management itself, I think working in a startup can be a great learning experience generally for business, for how to talk to investors, for how to balance, for how to manage finances, for how to market your product. You could be wireframing and drawing the designs yourself. So you'll become a whiz at being multidisciplinary and be able to do lots of different things that typically a product manager in a large tech company probably wouldn't. The next pro of a startup is you get to focus on shipping product because everything is so product focused and user acquisition focused at that early stage. There isn't as much process, or any process in fact. You have autonomy and you want to move fast. So basically what you're going to be doing is focusing on getting product out there because you need to get the product out there as a young startup to get people using it. And so you're going to be super agile, super reactive, super flexible. And the last pro of working at a startup is that if the startup is growing well and growing fast, that can also translate to incredibly fast career growth for you. So sometimes you see startups boom. You see startups go through hyper growth. So if you find yourself in a startup that has a lot of traction, that is growing fast, and it's a very small team, chances are you're gonna have to scale pretty quickly. And it often means that the people in the company at a early stage are the ones that will take on more responsibility as the startup grows quite quickly. There's obviously not as much friction and competition when it comes to growth because the team is probably quite small. On the flip side of that, compensation and benefits may not be as good at a startup because you are at that early stage. You only have a limited amount of runway, a limited amount of money. So you have to obviously take that financial risk. But I think that can be counteracted with getting into a startup early. You'll probably be given some stock options. And if the startup does well, then you got in early and you are able to grow with the startup. So that can make up for it in the longer term. Next, the cons of a startup. I guess doing everything / doing a lot is also a con. It means that you might do things that you don't think you should be doing. It means you might do things that you have no idea how to do. And while it's great to figure out stuff and learn from it, you know, it could also not be ideal. So again, this really depends on the startup, on the product, on the team. So many uncertain and volatile things can happen in this environment. So you kind of need to be prepared to do everything. And it could also mean that you're really stretched because yeah, you don't have that many people and you're having to wear 10 different hats as a product manager, as a salesperson, as a designer, as a product marketing person. It's a con to consider because it could be a lot. The next con is that the startup move can be risky depending on what stage it is at. It really depends on what your risk tolerance is. If you have a high risk tolerance and you're willing to make a bet on a startup and that bet is worth it for you because if the startup does well, you can grow with it and that's great. But there's also a chance that the startup will fail, as a lot of startups do. And so I think finding a startup at the right stage where it has proven product market fit, it has traction, it has customers, it has solid investment could be a way to de-risk that. But of course, there is always that risk in those very early stages. The next con is around the fact that you don't potentially have anyone to learn from. Small team, everyone is doing lots of different things, wearing multiple hats. You're not necessarily going to get the same level of coaching or mentorship that you would get in a large tech company where you have other product people, other product leaders to look up to and learn from. You're obviously learning a lot by doing, but sometimes you also don't know if that is the best way to do something. And you're not learning from experts. You're really figuring out stuff yourself. And I think there are so many benefits to that. You can compensate for this by looking for mentors or coaches or people that you can learn from outside of the immediate startup. So that's working in product at a startup. In summary, your area of responsibility and ownership will be broad, it will be big. You will have a lot of autonomy to do what you want, but that comes with risk. And it also means that since you can do a lot, you may not be as effective at doing all the different things that you are doing. So with all that being said, how on earth do you decide which option to take? As I mentioned, it just depends on your preference. It can also depend on your timing, and it can depend on the particular opportunity that is ahead of you. But generally speaking, I think if you are someone who really likes getting things done themselves, if you're creative, you like being hands-on, and you really like to just figure stuff out by doing, then I think startups could be a really good route to try. But maybe you like all that stuff, but stability is really important to you right now. And compensation is really important to you. I don't know, maybe you're looking to buy a house, right? Like life happens. Then big tech company is a great option as well, because if you spend some time at a big tech company, you're gonna learn so much, especially if it is growing. You're gonna learn at a very rapid pace. And then you can later on apply that to a startup that is growing and scaling. Try both. That's what I've done. I've worked at 3 large tech companies. I've done 2 startups. My heart is really in startups, but I am always learning so much in a larger tech company environment. And so what I'm doing at the moment is learning a lot from the big tech company side of things and doing some side hustles and trying to apply those learnings to some ideas that I have. But I have taken a few years of my career to focus and work just in startups too. And doing both has really helped me learn what I prefer and what I like. And I definitely wouldn't have known that if I didn't try to do both. And remember, these are two extremes that I talked about. You could probably find a sweet spot in the middle, or you could find a scaling startup, or you could find a big tech company that is on the cusp of enormous hyper growth, which is what I've done a couple of times in my career as well. So I hope this video was useful. Thank you so much for watching if you got this far, and I will see you in my next video.